There are children born in the mire who are said to be graced by kami, or touched by yokai. These children display strange traits or odd dispositions as children. Some are more strange or off-putting than others. They will be treated as outcasts by society, forgotten about or shamed. But some will have a chance at a meaningful life if their families send them away to train at the sacred temple of the Kyoshin. Deep in the mire, the Kyoshin, spiritual warriors of the samurai, train to unlock their hidden potential and to give meaning and purpose to those outcasts who are rejected by society, by the circumstances of their birth. Whether they be yokai or kami, holy or wretched, none are dismissed from the Kyoshin lifestyle. That was what Tsukimori Shoujiro had been told when he had first been brought to them. Yet he was never so sure. From the very day of his birth, Sojuro was considered strange. He was not born like other children, for his hair was not black or dark, as most of the samurai. It was white as fallen snow, and his eyes, more horrid than anything. They were blue, a misty, faint blue like a husky or spirit. They seemed to glow with an otherworldly fire. To gaze upon Sojiro's eyes was like staring into the eyes of a phantom, haunting and terrifying. But in truth, Sojuro would have given anything to be able to gaze upon them. For his eyes were misty and cloudy, not because of their wretched nature, but because Sojuro was born blind. Unable to see, Sojiro's only home was darkness. His mother loved Sojuro with all her heart. She cared for him as a mother should, holding him close and promising him that he was not a monster or a phantom, but her beloved son. Sojiro's father, a samurai retainer of Donyoku, was actually fearful of his son. No one in Donyoku had hair or eyes like him, and he knew his wife was too loyal to have an affair anyway, so where did this boy's traits come from? The only explanation he could think of was that he was a yokai, or at least touched by one. This fear was shared by many of the villagers who began to resent and fear the child. Sojuro could not leave his own home for fear that he would be the victim of cruel jokes or pranks that he would never see coming. He learned to recognize the subtle sound of a tomato or apple being thrown in his direction and duck. He learned to catch the smell of tar or honey nearby before it was poured on his head by pranking teenagers. And he memorized the taste in the air that came from sweat when rogues and thugs hid behind walls to ambush him. But their fear of him caused them to perspire. The world he saw was nothing but darkness, but the world he could not see was filled with devils at every side. Sojuro fell into a deep depression, feeling no love or compassion from anyone other than his mother and his elder sister, who both took care of him. But even they could not keep his demons at bay, and in time the young Sojuro found his way through his home and discovered his father's tanto knife. Tears in his eyes, and desperate to end his misery, he attempted to cut out his own eyes so that no one could ever whisper under their breath about his horrid, ghastly demon's gaze. He was unsuccessful. His sister caught him before he could complete his task, and his mother was beside herself with grief. Her little Sojuro was suffering, and she could not cure him of his pain. She was left with one final decision. She sent Sojuro away to live at the Kyoshin secret temple, hoping that might give him the camaraderie he sought so fiercely. As she bowed to the Kyoshin elders, pleading with them to give her son a home, they looked upon him and saw his eyes. They whispered amongst themselves, hoping that Sojuro would not hear, but he did. They too were unnerved by the gaze of his ghostly, pale, blind blue eyes. However, to his surprise, they accepted him as a student. He was given a walking cane, but upon touching it, Sojuro realized it was not what it appeared to be. It felt strange. It was a shiko mizue, a sword cane, the standard weapon of all Kyoshin. Using his cane, he walked around the temple, tapping lightly upon the ground, the walls, and the stairs to learn the place's layout. He became familiar with its smells, sounds, and tastes. The food was meager, but enough for him to live on, and there were other students at the temple, but most gave him a wide berth. The training was difficult, particularly for him, as he could not see his opponent. He could not see the proper way to hold his sword, so he had to adapt and learn to feel the handle and memorize where that meant the blade was facing. There was only one area he excelled in: blindfold sparring. It was a regular Kyoshin training method to blindfold the students and have them learn to see with the mind's eye. None of the students understood this like Sojuro. As the other students stumbled into each other, grasping for something to cling to beyond their blindfolds, Sojuro moved with precision, always outdoing the other students, for he was familiar with the darkness and used to blindness. His trainers praised him for his talent, but his fellow students were not so understanding and very fearful. Many grew to distrust Sojuro, and soon some were beginning to pull very similar pranks on the boy that he experienced as a child. But one of the instructors, Sensei Koetsuji, who took notice of the boy's suffering, took him aside and began to train him in the art of the Kage stance, a stance where the warrior twirls his blade around his body in a defensive posture. He explained it was an advanced technique, one some Kyoshin spend years perfecting, and for a blind teenager like Sojuro, it might even be impossible. But if he could master the motion and learn its secrets, no enemy would touch him. He could create a zone of awareness and defense around himself. Sojuro spent years learning, practicing, spending countless hours memorizing just the motions he had to do, and without being able to see, he had to feel the sensation of the sword in his hand, hear the subtle whistling of steel passing his ear, passing his shoulders, swirling in a path of death around his body. More than once he would cut himself, or drop the sword, or lose focus and strike something near him. It was grueling, bitter, and at times infuriating. By the time he was 19 years old, he finally managed to master the technique. But to what end? He was still not quite sure. But in his time learning the style, many of his peers and fellow students had completed their own training and were now pursuing their own paths beyond the temple. Sojuro was left to lament his fate as always being left behind, unable to see any path ahead. Sensei Koetsuji told him often that the path one walks is not a physical one, not one that can be seen with the eyes of man, but rather with the soul. No Kyoshin can truly reach their potential until they have learned to see without seeing, to know what lies before them without having to ask. A true Kyoshin is more than a warrior, more than a vagabond, more than a monk. They are spiritual travelers. They go where mortal man cannot, and that is what he believes Sojuro will become, and perhaps could do it better than any other. All these things were pretty and nice for Sojuro to hear, but they weren't things he could be proud of yet. Nothing to go home and tell his mother about. 2 more years passed, and grave news came to the temple. A renegade band of Wulin calling themselves the Dragon's Teeth had been sighted near the temple. With the Kyoshin posing a threat to future invasions of the mire, they would burn the temple to the ground, and with them they brought a few Sanhu, Tiandi, and Zhangjun to assist in this deed. The elders would prepare to defend the temple and send the younger students to safety. Sojuro longed to help, to aid the elders in the defense, but the elders would not have it. What could a blind youth possibly do against a warband of fire-wielding Wulin? Sensei Koetsuji spoke up on his behalf, arguing every warrior has the right to defend what they believe in, but the elders were firm. He was to flee with the children and protect them on the path to the higher mountains. The children were nervous around Sojuro and his frightening eyes, so he blindfolded himself to hide his gaze from them. It didn't change anything for him visually anyway, and it seemed to calm the children down some. But as they walked, he smelt burning wood and timber collapsing, filling his ears. It couldn't be. "Children, hide in the rocks and trees. Do not emerge until I tell you," Sojuro cried. As the children ran to hide, Sojuro stepped away and listened. 5 figures were approaching. He heard the shuffling, the distinct shuffling of autumn leaves, the smell of alcohol and black powder. A lot of it. Arsonists. There was a scent of flames, too. And then he heard voices. "Only one?" An elderly voice. In its 60s, most likely. "Must have run off when they heard we were coming." Female. 35 or so. Slight congestion in the throat. "Wait, is he blindfolded?" Male. 21. Mustache that reverberates when speaking. Possibly overweight as he sounds like he's breathing heavily. "Easy enough to kill, then. They probably ditched him." "This is your only warning," Sojuro shouted, holding out his cane. "Walk away now, and you live. Stay, and none of you will leave this mountain alive." "Ooh," came the response, a mocking laughter and false gasp of fear as the overweight one approached. Sojuro quieted himself and listened. He heard the chuckling, the rustling of leaves, and humming, a soft but faint humming above him. He smiled and stepped back, pretending to stumble. "Want to take that blindfold so you can see before you die? Or don't you want to look at me before I gut you?" the young man asked. In a moment, "Even the sighted will not want to look upon you." Sojuro struck the tree with his cane, raising a laugh from the group of Wulin. He struck the tree again, and again, and again. You really are blind. I'm right here. The rest of his taunt was cut off by a crashing sound and the roar of angry hornets. A swarm of hornets poured from a hive that Sojuro had heard above him in the tree, and his strikes had disturbed it. The Tsanhu was surrounded by the stinging and furious insects, screaming, thrashing, and wailing as he was stung repeatedly, his face and body swelling and his body leaking pus and venom. The Wulin all ceased their laughter as two of them charged him at once. He waited. The old one was coming. He was slower. His legs weren't lifting off the ground well, causing more shuffling in the grass. Arthritis was in his knees, a weakness. As the young one charged, he ducked her wild strike and held out his leg, sweeping at the old man's knees. Unable to lift his legs, he took the blow and tumbled. Sojuro unsheathed his sword fast and impaled it down on the spot he heard the collapse. And he felt blade pierce through bone. He'd hit him in the head with it, leaving the old man dead. "You bastard!" the young one screamed. Sojuro cried out as he heard steel whiz close to his face. He stumbled back and tried to regain his footing. He focused, searching for something, anything, and then he tasted it. Black powder in the air. There was black powder leaking from something, and each time the warrior got close, the taste and smell was stronger. It was leaking out of him somewhere. Perhaps a pocket or satchel was close. It didn't matter. He just needed a light. The warrior, covered in powder, took a swing, and Sojuro felt the changing in air pressure, the sudden disturbance around him. He held up his sword just in time to block, and then slid his metal sword down fast, causing sparks across the steel. That did it. The sparks hit the air. The sudden bang from the exploding gunpowder knocked Sojuro backwards and scorched his blindfold. He cried out and threw it from his face to avoid burning. And the last two Wulins saw his eyes. The cold, blue, demonic eyes. "What the hell is this guy? He ain't human. Look at those eyes. Be careful. He might be faking that blindness thing. Those Kyoshins, they say they got that mind's eye thing. Eyes of the gods or something?" While they talked, Sojuro focused and entered his kaze stance, twirling the blade with absolute precision. Let go of their words. Let go of their taunts. Let go of the sounds around you. Forget the hornets buzzing. Forget the moaning corpses behind you. Forget the children crying and hiding in the rocks. Focus only on the stance. Focus on the spinning. There is no enemy. There is no ally. There is only the darkness, the void, and all that cross it will be met with a furious response. And then suddenly he felt it. It rang like a bell, the sensation of a sword hitting his twirling blade. With reflexes he didn't even know he had, he followed through and gripped his sword in a reverse hold and swung it down, cutting at the knee of his foe. And just as the enemy sank to one knee to grip his wounded knee, he spun again and repeated the slash, hacking off half of his face. The enemy fell dead, and the final Wulin screamed in terror. Though Sojuro couldn't see it, the Wulin was panicking as he saw the demon-eyed warrior cut down all of his comrades by himself. "Damn it! I'm out of here!" he screamed, running to get away, staggering to escape. Sojuro let him. He sounded young. He didn't need to die here. Besides, the odds of him escaping the mire all by himself were slim anyway. The children all began to slink out of hiding, looking to their elder with a look of sheer awe. "Master Tsukimori?" they asked. He paused at the name. None had ever called him master, or referred to him by his surname before. "Will we go home now?" "Lead the way," he said, "and take my hand. I do not feel I can find the way alone." The children guided their savior back to the temple, where they told the other elders of Sojuro's deeds. Sensei Koetsuji was beside himself with pride, and all the elders clapped him on the back, thanking him for his work. But all Sojuro could feel was a sense of longing. To return home. To share this news with his mother about all he had done. To make her proud. And to show her he had finally done something worthwhile. He was no longer a poor, blind boy with no friends and no hope in this world. He was far more than that, and had proven that. The mire holds many secrets, some more fantastical than others. But throughout the mire there is one legend of a blind phantom. A hanyo, or half-yokai, who walks silently through the marshes, traveling from town to town. He hides his eyes with a blindfold so none can see his face, his white hair like the winter snows covering him where he treads, and he moves slowly, tapping his cane to find his way. But when the mire is threatened, when the village is at risk, he removes the blindfold and a yokai emerges. With senses known only by the kami and the world of spirits, he devastates Vikings, knights, and Wulin alike without a word, without fear, and without hesitation. And when he twirls his blade, no force can penetrate. He is the white phantom with the eyes of blue, Tsukimori Shoujiro.